Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world one book at a time.
Today is going to be a bit of a paradigm shift for us. We're often looking at these really abstract concepts or, historical forces.
Right.
But today we're looking at something so tangible, so pervasive that it's actually become invisible. We're talking about stuff.
Yeah, and when we say stuff, we aren't just talking about, the clutter in your garage or that impulse buy at the checkout.
No, not at all.
We are talking about the physical embodiment of a global economy. We're trying to look at the, frankly, terrifying machinery that connects a mine in Africa to a factory in China, to a shopping mall in America, and then finally to a landfill somewhere else.
It's like the biography of our material world. And our guide for this deep dive is Annie Leonard and her, I think it's fair to say, seminal book, The Story of Stuff, which was co-authored with Ariane Conrad.
I have to admit, when I first saw this title years ago, probably from that viral video that the book came from, I thought it was going to be something a bit lighter.
Like a critique of consumer trends or something.
Exactly. Maybe you look at why we buy too many shoes. But that is so not what this is. This is a hardcore systems-level analysis, just, disguised as a very simple story.
And that's really the genius of her work. She takes these incredibly complex ideas from environmental economics, toxicology, global trade policy.
Heavy stuff.
Really heavy stuff. And she maps them onto a simple stick figure drawing of a conveyor belt. But the central question she's asking is deadly serious.
And what is that question?
It's exploitation.
Yeah.
How does a materials economy that's built on a linear model, extraction, production, consumption, disposal, how does that system fundamentally reshape our ecosystems, our communities, and even our own sense of who we are as people?
The word that jumps out at me there is linear. We live on a finite planet that by its very nature operates in cycle.
The water cycle, the carbon cycle.
Life cycles, everything is circular.
Right.
But we've just dropped this completely linear economic system on top of it. We take, we make, and we waste. End of the line.
And that's Leonard's central thesis. You cannot run a linear system indefinitely on a finite planet. It's just a physical impossibility.
It has to break at some point.
It has to. And we are literally watching that collision course happen in real time. We have an economic system that demands infinite growth, and it's smashing up against a biosphere that has very real, non-negotiable limits on its water, on its atmosphere, on its soil.
Which is exactly why this matters so much right now. We see all these headlines: climate change, supply chain fragility, microplastics in our blood.
They all feel like separate issues.
They do, but Leonard's argument is that they're not separate crises at all. They're symptoms. They're all just symptoms of this one single destructive material flow.
Exactly. If you look at something like climate change in a vacuum, you might just focus on, say, car tailpipes.
Right, the obvious culprit.
But if you look at it through the lens of this materials economy, you suddenly realize that the sheer amount of energy it takes to extract, to ship, to process, and then to dump all of our stuff, that is a massive and often completely overlooked driver of carbon emissions.
Okay, so before we really get into the gears of this machine, I want to set the scope for you, for the listener.
Yeah.
Because usually when this topic comes up, consumption, waste, the conversation immediately goes to individual guilt.
Oh, yeah. Did you recycle that yogurt cup?
Did you bring your canvas tote bag to the store? That whole thing.
And Leonard is very, very clear on this. This is not a book designed to make you feel guilty for buying a coffee. It is not a how-to guide for sorting your recycling better.
So it's not about individual blame.
In fact, she argues that focusing on those tiny individual actions can actually be a distraction. It takes our eyes off the much bigger systemic failures. We're here to visualize the machine, not to, scold the people writing inside it.
I really appreciate that distinction. It lets us look at the architecture of the problem itself, rather than getting bogged down in our own small part in it. So let's talk about Annie Leonard herself. She didn't just, wake up one day and decide to dedicate her life to garbage. She's an investigator.
She's a detective of waste, is what she is. Her background is actually fascinating. She grew up in Seattle, and she writes about these childhood memories of driving into the mountains, into the North Cascades.
Okay.
And she watched the landscape change in real time. She saw the forests literally retreating and the strip malls advancing. So she had this very early, visceral sense that the stuff was eating the nature.
But the real turning point, the moment that set her on this path, was what she calls the fresh kills moment. That happened when she was a student in New York City.
Yeah, at Barnard College. She was walking to class, and you know how it is in New York, you pass these huge piles of black garbage bags on the sidewalk.
A daily sight.
Right, but she stopped and asked the question that most of us just ignore. What is actually in there and where does it all go?
And that one question led her to the Fresh Kills landfill on Staten Island.
It did. And the way she describes Fresh Kills in the book, it's genuinely haunting. This wasn't just a dump. It was a man-made geographical feature.
A monument to consumption.
That's the perfect word for it, a monument. She describes standing there, just overwhelmed by the smell, the noise of the bulldozers, the swarms of seagulls, and looking up at these peaks of garbage that were 80 feet taller than the Statue of Liberty.
80 feet taller than Lady Liberty. I mean, just pause on that image for a second.
It's staggering.
It's like a shadow civilization built entirely out of our discards.
And that was the moment of profound realization for her. She was looking at this muck, and she could see perfectly usable materials. Paper, metal, plastic, all being churned into this toxic soup.
So she realized waste isn't an accident.
Exactly. It's a design flaw. It is the inevitable, predictable output of a system that places zero value on materials once they leave the cash register. And that realization launched her entire career with Greenpeace, tracking waste trafficking, which is a real thing all around the globe.
Waste trafficking.
Right.
It sounds like the plot of a spy thriller, but it's just, global economics.
It's shipping our trash to the places with the least political power to say no.
So let's get into the core of the book. Leonard breaks down this whole materials economy into 5 main stages: extraction, production, distribution, consumption, and disposal.
The straight line, the conveyor belt.
Let's walk through it then. Let's start at the very beginning. Stage 1, extraction, or as Leonard puts it, trashing the planet.
Yeah, she doesn't mince words. Extraction is basically natural resource exploitation. It's logging the trees, mining for minerals, pumping the oil, draining the aquifers.
Okay, that seems straightforward.
But the key insight Leonard brings here isn't just, chopping down trees is bad. It's the concept of displacement. And maybe even more shocking, the sheer ratio of waste to product.
That ratio. I remember the example she uses of a simple gold wedding ring. It blew my mind.
It's a classic systems example, and it's devastating. To get the gold for one single wedding ring, the mining system generates roughly 20 tons of mine waste.
20 tons for one ring.
You are literally moving mountains. You're using cyanide heat bleaching. You're destroying entire ecosystems for just a few grams of metal on someone's finger.
And this is where that idea of displacement comes in, because these resources aren't just sitting there in an empty landscape.
Exactly. There's this sort of colonial mindset baked into extraction that assumes the land is empty until we show up.
But people live there.
People live there. Animals live there. Forests are functioning. Living systems. Leonard frames extraction as the very first externalized cost. When a corporation gets the rights to log a forest in Indonesia or mine for copper in Chile, they are often displacing indigenous communities that have lived there for centuries.
So the cost of that ring isn't just the market price of gold.
Not even close. It's the destruction of a local economy. It's the poisoning of a watershed. It's the loss of a way of life. That's the real cost.
It reminds me of that historical concept, the enclosure of the commons, taking something that was shared or natural, putting a fence around it, and calling it a commodity.
That's a perfect analogy. And so often, this extraction is happening in what we call the global south, in developing nations, which brings up what Leonard calls the resource curse.
The great paradox.
It is. You would think that a country like the Congo, which is sitting on these massive deposits of coltan, which we need for every single smartphone and laptop, you'd think they would be one of the wealthiest nations on Earth.
But it's the exact opposite.
It's the opposite, because the system is designed to extract that value and ship it north. The money and the materials leave, but the mess stays behind.
The environmental degradation, the social conflict.
The corruption, the resource wars, that all stays local. So extraction is the engine of global inequality right from the very start of the chain.
Okay, so we've trashed the mountain, we've displaced the village, we have our raw materials. Now we move on to stage 2. Production. This is where we head into the factory.
And this is where the big chemistry set comes out. Leonard makes this really critical point that we rarely use raw materials in their pure state anymore. We mix them with thousands of synthetic chemicals to give them properties we want.
Like stain resistance or fire resistance or flexibility.
Better living through chemistry, as the old slogan used to go.
Right.
Except Leonard kind of updates that slogan to toxics in, toxics out. We are using literally tens of thousands of synthetic chemicals in our industrial production.
And we don't know what most of them do.
We have no idea. Only a tiny fraction have ever been properly tested for human health impacts, and almost none have been tested for what are called synergistic effects, how they interact with each other once they get mixed together inside your body.
She talks specifically about BFRs, brominated flame retardants.
BFRs, yeah. They're a known neurotoxin. They're designed to stop things from catching fire, which on the surface sounds like a good thing.
Sure.
But we started putting them in everything. Pillows, mattresses, the casings of our electronics. And the problem is they don't stay there. They off-gas, they get into house dust, we breathe them in.
And they're persistent.
They're persistent and they are bioaccumulative, meaning they don't break down in the environment and they build up in living tissue.
They bind to fat.
They bind to fat. And since we are at the top of the food chain, we end up accumulating the highest concentrations. The book has this absolutely terrifying section on human breast milk.
I remember this. It's chilling.
It's shown to contain a whole cocktail of modern industrial toxins. So the system is compromising the most natural, nurturing substance on Earth.
That connects the factory floor directly to our biology. But the first people to really pay that price aren't us, the consumers. It's the workers.
The people on the factory floor, absolutely. Leonard highlights that a huge number of factory workers, especially in electronics and textiles, are women of reproductive age.
And they're handling these chemicals all day.
Carcinogens, reproductive toxins, they are the proverbial canaries in the coal mine for the whole system.
And then right outside the factory, you have the fence line communities.
The people who literally live next door. If you live downwind from a refinery or downstream from a chemical plant, you are breathing and drinking the pollution that the rest of us are externalizing.
And statistically, we know who those people are.
We do. They are overwhelmingly poor communities and communities of color. This is the heart of the environmental justice movement. Production isn't just about making stuff. It's about concentrating toxicity in very specific, politically vulnerable populations so the rest of us can have cheap products.
A spatial segregation of harm. The harm is concentrated over there, so the product can be enjoyed over here. Which brings us to stage 3. Distribution.
Right. Distribution. Now, this sounds like just trucks and ships, and it is, but Leonard defines it as the system's strategy to keep prices artificially low while moving goods as fast as humanly possible.
This is where she aims what she calls the golden arrow at us, the consumer.
Exactly. And this brings us to that famous example from the book, the $4.99 radio. I think everyone's had that experience, right? You walk into a big box store, you see some electronic gadget for $5, and you think, wow, what a deal.
How do they even make it for that?
And that's the question Leonard wants us to ask. Do the math. You have to mine the metal, refine the oil for the plastic, mold the parts, pay someone to assemble it, package it, ship it halfway across the world on a container ship, truck it to the store, pay the cashier, pay for the store's electricity.
And still make a profit at 4.99 cents.
It's mathematically impossible. Not in a fair market.
So how is it possible?
It's only possible because the true costs are externalized. Externalized cost is just a fancy economic term that means the real cost of making something isn't reflected in its price tag.
It means someone else is paying for it.
Someone else is paying. It's being paid by the health of the factory worker. It's being paid by the asthma of the kid living next to the incinerator. It's being paid by the future generation that has to deal with the carbon we pumped into the atmosphere to ship it.
So the low price is a lie.
It is a complete fiction. It's a subsidy that's provided by the destruction of the planet and the exploitation of people. If we actually had to pay the true cost of that radio, including healthcare and environmental cleanup, it might cost $50 or $100.
And at that price, you wouldn't buy it as a throwaway item.
You'd treat it like an heirloom, you'd fix it. It completely changes the psychology of the purchase. A bargain just means we're racking up a debt that someone else, somewhere else, is going to have to pay.
Wow. And the entire global distribution system, these massive container ships, the just-in-time logistics, it's all optimized to hide those costs and just keep the flow moving.
Which brings us to the absolute engine of the entire machine, stage 4, consumption.
The golden arrow,
Yeah.
the heart of the system. This is where we, the people, come in.
Or, maybe more accurately, where we are manipulated to come in. Leonard makes a powerful argument that within this system, our primary identity has been deliberately engineered to be that of consumer.
Not a citizen or a parent or a community member.
First and foremost, a consumer. And she quotes the retail analyst Victor Lebeau here, and honestly, Reading this quote for the first time felt like finding the smoking gun in a murder mystery.
It's so explicit.
It really is. So Victor Lebow was an economic analyst back in the 1950s, right after World War II. The American industrial machine was massive. It was all geared up for the war, but now the war was over.
And they needed a way to keep the factories running.
Exactly. And Lebow wrote, and I'm quoting here, "Our enormously productive economy demands that we make consumption our way of life. We need things consumed, burned up, worn out, replaced, and discarded at an ever-increasing pace."
Burned up, worn out, replaced. He's talking about our household goods like they're just fuel for a furnace.
He is treating the entire material world purely as throughput for the economic engine. This wasn't some accident. It was a deliberate, conscious strategy. And to achieve that ever-increasing pace, the system developed two incredibly powerful tools.
Planned obsolescence and perceived obsolescence.
The 1-2 punch.
Okay, let's break those down. Planned obsolescence is what she calls the designed for the dump strategy.
Right. This is the technical side of things. It's the printer that has a little chip inside that counts 5,000 pages and then just shuts the machine down, even if mechanically it's perfectly fine.
It's the smartphone battery that's glued into the case so you can't replace it, forcing you to buy a whole new phone.
Yes. Engineers literally sit in meetings and have discussions about how to reduce the lifespan of a product so that it fails just after the warranty expires. It's engineering against the user.
It's so cynical. But you said perceived obsolescence is even more insidious. How does that work?
Perceived obsolescence happens entirely in our heads. This is the fashion component. This is about making us throw away stuff that is still perfectly useful.
The classic example being the fat heel versus the skinny heel on a shoe.
Exactly. Leonard uses that shoe example. Let's say you buy a good pair of shoes. They're comfortable, they protect your feet. Physically, they're fine for years and years.
But then the fashion industry decides that this season is all about skinny heels, and you have last season's fat heels.
And suddenly, your perfectly functional, comfortable shoes are obsolete, not because they're broken, but because they communicate the wrong social signal. They tell people, you're not with it, you're not keeping up.
And that feeling drives what Leonard calls the work-watch-spend cycle.
This is the sociological trap. She lays it out like this. We work incredibly long hours to make money to participate in this economy. We come home totally exhausted. Our political imagination is just drained.
So what do we do?
We sit down and watch TV or scroll through Instagram, and we are just bombarded with advertisements.
And those ads aren't selling us product features anymore. They're selling us an identity.
They're selling a solution to an anxiety they just created. They tell us, you suck, your hair is wrong, your car is old, your kitchen is embarrassing. But if you buy this thing, you will be loved. You will be happy. You will be successful.
And because we're tired and feeling inadequate, we go out and buy the thing. We get that little dopamine hit, that retail therapy.
But then the credit card bill arrives, and the debt piles up. So we have to work more hours to pay for the stuff we bought to make us feel better about working so much in the first place.
Or the hamster wheel.
It's a perfect, self-perpetuating hamster wheel. And crucially, Leonard points out that this cycle isolates us. When we're stuck on that wheel working and shopping, we're not at the town hall meeting. We're not organizing with our neighbors for better parks or schools.
We're consumers, not citizens.
Mm-hmm.
And a consumer is a much less threatening identity to the status quo.
Infinitely less. If you're busy at the mall, you're not busy trying to dismantle the system.
Which brings us to the end of the line. After we've bought the thing, used it for maybe 6 months, and the style has changed. Stage 5, disposal.
Or, as she calls it, the myth of away.
We throw it in the bin, the garbage truck comes, and it's gone.
But as Leonard constantly reminds us, on a closed ecosystem like our planet, there is no away. It has to go somewhere. And usually that somewhere is a landfill.
Which we know leaches heavy metals and other toxic chemicals into the groundwater.
Or, even worse, in her view, it goes to an incinerator. Leonard is extremely critical of incineration as a solution. When you burn trash, especially plastics and electronics, you're not making it disappear, you're just changing its state.
You're turning solid mass into toxic ash and air pollution.
And you're creating dioxins. Dioxins are one of the most toxic man-made substances known to science. They're carcinogenic, they disrupt our hormones, they damage the immune system. And once again, where do we build these incinerators?
Not in the rich neighborhoods.
Never. They're always sited in the communities with the least amount of political capital to fight back. But there's a third option for disposal that we haven't mentioned yet.
Exporting it.
Exporting it. She calls this toxic colonialism. We load our crushed electronics, our plastic waste onto massive ships, and we send them to places like China, India, Vietnam, Ghana. We literally dump our waste on the very same people whose resources we extracted back in stage one.
It completes the circle of exploitation.
It is an almost poetically cruel circle of harm. We take their resources, leaving a hole in the ground. We use their labor to make the stuff, polluting their air. We use it for a little while, and then we ship the toxic remains right back to them to deal with.
And all the while, we're patting ourselves on the back for recycling because we put it in the blue bin.
Right. Leonard really forces us to look at what happens after the bin.
So that's the flow. It's a really powerful narrative. But she also steps back from the conveyor belt to map the system dynamics, the power structures that keep this whole thing running. She talks about the actors, corporations, government, and the people.
It's a triangle of power, but it is not an equilateral triangle. Leonard's argument is that in the last few decades, corporations have grown so large and powerful that they effectively dwarf the government, and they're driven by one single incentive.
Profit growth.
That's it. And the primary mechanism for achieving that growth is externalizing costs. The more costs they can push off their books and onto the public or the environment, the higher their profit margin. It's simple math.
So the government, in theory, is supposed to be the counterbalance to that. It's meant to protect the commons, our shared air, water, public health, and the people.
In theory. But what we see in practice is something experts call regulatory capture.
Where the industry being regulated essentially captures the regulators.
Exactly. You see corporate lobbyists writing the laws that are supposed to regulate their own industries. So the government ends up acting less like a protector of the people and more like a facilitator for extraction, building the roads for the logging trucks, giving subsidies for oil exploration.
So where does that leave the rest of us, the people?
Divided. This system is brilliant at pitting us against each other. The classic narrative that gets rolled out is jobs versus the environment.
Yeah, yes. If you want to save that forest, you must hate the loggers. You want their families to starve.
It's a completely false dichotomy. Leonard points out that a truly green, sustainable economy would actually produce more jobs, just different kinds of jobs. But that threat of job loss is used like a weapon to hold communities hostage and force them to accept toxic industries they don't want.
And we have to talk about the way we keep score in this whole game. GDP, gross domestic product.
The scorecard, right. This is the big number the government and the media use to tell us if we're winning. But GDP is a really bizarre calculator. It measures all money changing hands as a positive. It doesn't care why the money changed hands.
The classic example is a car crash or an oil spill.
Right. If you have a massive oil spill, you spend millions of dollars hiring cleanup crews, buying chemical dispersants, paying for hotel rooms, buying meals. GT goes up. The economy is growing because of a catastrophe.
If I get cancer from the local factory and have to spend $100,000 on chemotherapy, GDP goes up.
But if you decide to grow your own food in your backyard instead of buying it, that's invisible to GDP. If you repair your own clothes instead of buying new ones, GDP suffers.
So the system values the transaction, even if it's a transaction based on destruction or misery.
Exactly. It has no way to value well-being or health or clean air or strong communities. Leonard's point is that we are aiming at the wrong target. If your only goal is GDP growth, you will literally destroy the planet to achieve it.
This all seems to feed into the acceleration of the system, the feedback loops. Why does it seem to be speeding up, getting more intense?
Because it's an addiction loop. As we deplete the easy-to-get resources, the surface-level oil, the easily accessible forests, we have to use more energy and more violence to get what's left.
Like fracking or deep-sea drilling?
Exactly. That requires more capital investment. To pay back that bigger investment, the companies need to sell more stuff faster. So they ramp up the advertising, they shorten the lifespans of products even more. It creates this death spiral where the damage accelerates even as there are real benefits to us as people plateau or even decline.
It's like a shark that has to keep swimming or it dies.
That is the fundamental nature of a growth-based economy on a finite planet. It cannot pause. It has no off switch.
Let's go a little deeper on the identity piece. We touched on the work, watch, spend cycle, but there's something more existential going on here. Leonard suggests we're trying to fill non-material needs with material goods.
That is the core tragedy of consumerism. As humans, we have these deep non-material needs. We need a sense of community, a sense of purpose, a feeling of competence. We need love.
When the system has an answer for all of those, a product.
It has commodified the solutions to those needs. You want to feel like you're part of a tribe? buy the right sports jersey. You want to feel competent and skilled, buy the high-end power tool.
But the satisfaction doesn't last, does it?
It's fleeting because a power tool isn't the same as a skill, and a jersey isn't the same as a true friend. The purchase is a shortcut that ultimately fails to deliver. So we buy again and again, hoping the next thing will work.
And Leonard frames our identity itself as a system output. We're not born obsessed with brands. We are trained to be.
We are trained from birth, and this training, she says, narrows our political imagination.
What does she mean by that?
When we see ourselves primarily as consumers, the only form of power we think we have is voting with our dollars. We think, okay, I'll solve this problem by buying the fair trade coffee instead of the other one.
And we forget that we can vote with our votes. We can vote with our time and our voices. We can actually change the laws.
Exactly. Consumer is a fundamentally weak identity. Citizen is a strong one. And the system has a vested interest in keeping us in the weak lane.
I want to revisit the global inequality piece. We talked about the resource curse, but let's connect it directly to the idea of cheap goods. We often hear this argument that we need this system because it provides cheap stuff to poor people in rich countries. The Walmart is a lifeline for the working class argument.
That is a very powerful and a very complex trap. Leonard's argument is that those goods are only cheap for the American consumer because the system has exploited people who are even poorer somewhere else. It pits the American working poor against the global poor.
A race to the bottom.
It's the definition of a race to the bottom, and it simultaneously erodes the local economy here at home. When we flood our market with cheap imported goods, we export our own manufacturing jobs. The local community loses its earning power and then becomes dependent on the cheap goods because they can't afford anything else.
It's a vicious cycle that hollows out the middle class here while it's devastating the developing world.
And all the while, pollution follows the path of least resistance.
Oh.
There's this infamous memo that was leaked years ago from Larry Summers when he was a chief economist at the World Bank. He basically wrote that, and I'm paraphrasing, the economic logic behind dumping a load of toxic waste in the lowest wage country is impeccable.
That is just horrifying to hear said out loud.
It's horrifying, but it's the honest, cold logic of the system. If you value a human life based only on its earning potential, then killing poor people is, from a purely economic standpoint, cheaper than killing rich people. Leonard forces us to confront that this isn't an accidental byproduct of the system. This is its operating code.
So let's bring this right into the present day. The book has been out for a while now, but these systems feel like they're roaring louder than ever. I'm thinking specifically about climate instability.
You absolutely cannot solve the climate crisis without addressing this material flow. The extraction and production sectors are just massive energy sinks. If we all switch to electric cars, but we keep buying the same amount of disposable crap, the emissions from the factories and the mines will still cook the planet.
And what about the plastics crisis? I mean, we're now finding microplastics in human placentas.
We have crossed a terrifying threshold. The disposal stage of the system has leaked back into everything. Plastic is now a part of the geology and the biology of the entire planet. And this is where Leonard really attacks the limits of recycling. We've been sold this comforting myth that if we just put the bottle in the blue bin, it magically goes in a circle.
But it's really downcycling, isn't it?
Almost always. Thermodynamics is a harsh mistress. You take a high-quality plastic bottle, you melt it down, the polymers degrade. You can't make another high-quality bottle. You make something of lower quality, like carpet fiber or a park bench.
And when that carpet wears out?
It goes to the dump. You've only delayed its trip to the landfill by one life cycle.
So we can't recycle our way out of a production volume problem.
It's like leaving the tap running full blast and then celebrating how fast you can mop up the floor. It's insane. We have to turn down the tap. We have to reduce the input into the system in the first place.
There's also the fragility issue. We saw this so clearly during the pandemic. What happens when these incredibly long, brittle supply chains suddenly snap?
Leonard's analysis absolutely predicted that. When your whole system relies on just-in-time shipping from halfway across the world just to save a few pennies per unit, you create a system with zero redundancy, zero resilience.
So one ship gets stuck in the Suez Canal, or one pandemic shuts down a single port.
And suddenly store shelves are empty. Resilience requires redundancy and local capacity, but the current system sees both of those things as inefficiency to be eliminated.
Okay, this brings me to the green consumerism trap. I think a lot of us who are concerned about this, and I include myself here, we try to buy better. We look for the organic label, the recycled paper, the ethically sourced whatever.
And Leonard is clear, that's not bad. She isn't saying go ahead and buy the most toxic stuff you can find, but she warns us very strongly that we cannot shop our way to a solution.
The idea that I'm saving the planet one organic cotton t-shirt at a time.
Right, but if you buy 50 organic cotton t-shirts that you don't need, you are still trashing the planet. The core problem is the volume. The problem is the consumer mindset itself. Green consumerism is dangerous because it's so comforting. It tells us we don't have to fundamentally change our lifestyle. We just have to change brands.
And her point is that we have to change the lifestyle.
Yeah.
We have to change the entire definition of what the good life even looks like.
Yes.
This connects so directly to the theme of our channel, crisis in perception. How does the story of stuff really illustrate a crisis in how we perceive reality?
The crisis is that the system is hermetically sealed from our view. When you walk into a supermarket or a department store, you are walking into a curated hallucination. You see these rows of perfect, clean, brightly colored objects. You do not see the strip mine, you do not see the sweatshop, you do not see the landfill.
The history of the object, its whole life story, is completely erased.
It's severed. We perceive the product as if it only exists in that single moment of purchase. And that blindness, that curated ignorance, prevents us from making truly moral choices. If the blood from the mine and the oil from the shipping were literally smeared on the product, we wouldn't buy it. So the system relies on maintaining that crisis of perception to function.
It also diffuses responsibility, doesn't it? Who is actually to blame for all this?
That's the insidious genius of a complex system. The designer says, I just designed what the marketing team asked for. The marketing team says, well, we just responded to what consumer data told us. The consumer says, I just bought what was on the shelf because it was cheap and I'm broke.
Everyone is just a cog in the machine, so no one feels like they're driving the bus.
But the bus is heading straight for a cliff. And the deepest crisis, I think, is that we have accepted a definition of progress and prosperity that is biologically suicidal. We perceive a rising stock market as an unqualified good, even if it directly corresponds to a collapsing ecosystem. Our entire perception of value is inverted.
So how do we begin to fix that perception? Leonard doesn't just leave us in the dump, does she? She does offer a vision for a shift.
She does. She calls for 3 major fundamental shifts. The first is the shift from a linear to a circular economy.
This is the zero waste or cradle-to-cradle idea.
Right. It's about biomimicry. In nature, there's no such thing as waste. Waste from one organism is food for another. A leaf falls from a tree, it decomposes and feeds the soil. We need to design our products so they can be fully disassembled and either safely composted or turned back into high-quality raw materials for the next generation of products. No more downcycling. True circularity.
Okay, what's the second shift?
The second is the shift from growth to progress. We need to smash the GDP dashboard. We need to start measuring the things that actually matter to human well-being. Median income, literacy rates, health outcomes, clean air, leisure time.
Because if the economy grows but we're all more miserable and the planet is dying, that's not progress.
That's cancer. It's just mindless growth for growth's sake.
And the third shift?
This is the internal one. The shift from consumer to citizen. This means re-engaging with the structures of power. It means fighting for corporate accountability laws, demanding transparency in supply chains, organizing for fair trade policies. It means reclaiming our collective power.
You know, there's a reflection she has near the end of the book that I really want to dwell on for a moment. It's about the scarcity of time.
Oh, this is my favorite part of the whole book. The system constantly tells us that we are material poor, that we need more stuff. But Leonard argues that what we really are is time poor.
We are trading our life hours for money, to buy stuff we don't need, to impress people we don't even know.
Exactly. What if we just stepped off that treadmill? If we bought less, repaired more, shared more, we wouldn't need to earn as much money.
Which means we could work less.
I'd work less. And then the big question is, what would we do with all that reclaimed time? Maybe we'd actually raise our own kids instead of outsourcing it. Maybe we'd cook our own food, make art, learn an instrument, talk to our neighbors.
We would be building the very community and connection that we've been trying to buy at the mall.
That's it, exactly. The end of the consumer era isn't about sacrifice. It's not about shivering in the dark. It is about a massive upgrade in the quality of our lives. It's about replacing stuff with connection and things with time.
That's a really powerful and hopeful place to land. It reframes this entire struggle not as a chore, not as a burden, but as a liberation.
It is a liberation. We're freeing ourselves from a machine that was never designed to make us happy in the first place.
We have covered a huge amount of ground today. We've traced this incredible path from the extraction zones of the global south through the toxic factories onto the container ships, into our own living rooms, and finally out to the landfills and incinerators.
It's a journey that really forces you to look at everything around you differently. The story of stuff is like being handed a pair of X-ray glasses. Once you put them on, you can't unsee it. You see the ghost of the mountain in the aluminum can. You see the oil rig in the plastic bag.
And seeing it, perceiving it clearly, is the first and most critical step to changing it.
Absolutely.
This book, The Story of Stuff, was written by Annie Leonard with Ariane Conrad. It is, I think, a truly foundational text for understanding the modern world. If you haven't read it, or if you haven't seen the original animated film online, we can't recommend it enough.
The film is 20 minutes that will fundamentally change how you see the world. The book gives you all the data and the depth behind it. Go get it from your library. Support the commons.
And talk about it with people. The system thrives on silence and ignorance. Break the silence. Ask where your stuff comes from.
Stay curious, and please don't accept the price tag as the truth.
This project is free and publicly accessible. If you'd like to support the time, tools, and research behind crisis and perception, you can become a supporter on Patreon.
For a shorter visual overview of this topic, see the mini explainer linked in the description.
If you enjoyed this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next. Thanks for listening.
See you next time.